You awaken slowly, not to the familiar chime of a digital alarm, but to a profound and unsettling silence that seems to absorb all sound. The air itself feels fundamentally different, thick, strangely heavy, and carrying a faint, musty scent you can't quite place. As your eyes flutter open, the world swims into a dim focus, revealing a room that is both ornate and deeply alien. Heavy velvet curtains smother the windows, permitting only the thinnest slivers of gray, coal-dusted light to penetrate the gloom. The dark, imposing furniture is carved with intricate shapes that seem to watch you from the shadows. This isn't just a different room. It feels like another reality, a place where the basic rules of comfort have been twisted. The first sensation that truly registers is a deep, insistent ache in your back and shoulders. You shift, trying to find a position of comfort that simply doesn't exist. There is no memory foam cradling your form. Instead, you feel a landscape of hard, unyielding lumps beneath the thin linen sheet, each one pressing into you like a collection of small stones. It's a primitive, almost hostile surface to sleep on, making you acutely aware that the very concept of a restful night's sleep, as you know it, has been left far behind in another century. Every toss and turn only serves to introduce you to a new and more awkward angle of discomfort, a stark introduction to the era's lack of luxury. What lies beneath you is a mattress stuffed, not with plush fibers or supportive springs, but with tightly packed horsehair, straw, and perhaps even corn husks. This was the standard of the day, a practical solution that was far more about function than comfort. Over time, these organic materials would inevitably compress and shift, forming the dense, unforgiving clumps that now plague your every attempt to relax. This construction was a simple fact of life, a piece of household technology that highlights the vast gulf between Victorian practicality and modern expectations of comfort. The bed wasn't a sanctuary. It was merely a designated place to lie down at the end of a long and arduous day. Nothing more. The lumpiness of the mattress is, unfortunately, the least of your worries. This dense bundle of organic material, absorbing moisture and warmth, creates the perfect ecosystem for a host of unwelcome bedfellows. It's a warm, dark, and humid haven for fleas, lice, and the dreaded bedbug. For the modern person, it's a horrifying thought, but for the Victorian, it was a constant, itchy reality. While the wealthy might have had their mattresses cleaned more frequently, the threat was ever present. The bed, meant to be a place of rest, was instead a potential vector for disease and a source of constant, tormenting irritation, an invisible battle fought nightly beneath the sheets. You take a deeper breath and regret it. The air is thick with floating particles, a universe of dust motes dancing in the thin shafts of light, piercing the gloom. In an age powered by coal, this wasn't just dust. It was a fine layer of soot and ash that settled on every surface, indoors and out. It coated the lungs, dusted the furniture, and created a permanent gray haze that defined city life. This atmospheric pollution wasn't an abstract concern discussed in newspapers. It was a physical presence in every room, a constant reminder of the industrial world churning just outside the window. The simple act of breathing felt different here. It felt heavier, dirtier, and far less refreshing. As your eyes adjust, they are inevitably drawn to the most captivating feature of the oppressive room. The walls, they are covered in a wallpaper of the most astonishing, vibrant green you have ever seen. It's a luminous, almost electric shade, a splash of brilliant life, amidst the gloom that feels both beautiful and strangely unnatural. The pattern is a dense, repeating motif of swirling leaves and exotic birds, a testament to the era's love for ornate decoration. This single design element dominates the space, a bold statement of style and wealth. It's the first thing in the room that feels truly beautiful, a welcome distraction from the discomfort and the dust, but its allure is deeply deceptive. This particular shade of emerald was no mere color. It was a cultural phenomenon, a definitive mark of fashionable, forward-thinking taste, championed by the burgeoning aesthetic movement, which celebrated art for art's sake. This green represented a rejection of drab industrialism and an embrace of nature and beauty. To have it on your walls was to signal your sophistication and your connection to the artistic vanguard. In a world of soot-stained grays and browns, its vibrancy was a powerful symbol of status and a deliberate choice to bring a piece of idealized, brilliant nature into the domestic sphere, no matter the cost. It was, in every sense, the color of the moment. The secret to this captivating, brilliant green was a chemical marvel known as Scheele's green, invented in the late 18th century by the Swedish chemist Carl Wilhelm Scheele. The pigment was a compound of copper and a substance the world knew all too well as a potent poison. Arsenic, the chemical name, copper arsenite, explicitly states its deadly nature. This pigment was cheap to produce, incredibly vibrant, and far more stable than previous vegetable-based greens, which tended to fade. Its creation was hailed as a triumph of modern chemistry, allowing for a level of chromatic intensity that was previously unimaginable in mass-produced household goods, like wallpaper and textiles. As chemistry advanced, Scheele's green was soon joined by an even more popular and vivid successor, Paris green, chemically known as copper acetorsenite. This new pigment offered a deeper, richer emerald hue that was even more resistant to fading, making it an instant favorite among designers and manufacturers. While it was also famously used as a rodenticide and insecticide, its primary commercial application was in creating beautiful objects, from wallpaper to paint to fine fabrics. Paris green became the definitive color of the mid-Victorian era, its deadly composition a secondary concern to its stunning visual appeal and its association with wealth, fashion, and sophisticated taste. The true horror of this wallpaper wasn't that you could be poisoned by licking it. The danger was far more insidious, woven into the very air you were breathing. In the damp climate of Britain, the organic paste used to hang the wallpaper provided a fertile ground for mold. Certain species of mold, when growing on the arsenic-rich pigment, could metabolize the poison and release it into the atmosphere as a highly toxic gas called trimethylarsine. This meant the beautiful walls were, quite literally, exuding a slow, invisible poison with every passing moment, turning the entire room into a beautifully decorated, sealed gas chamber that poisoned its inhabitants day and night. A dull, persistent headache begins to throb at your temples, and a wave of nausea rolls in your stomach. You might initially dismiss it as a consequence of a poor night's sleep or the stuffy air, but your body is sending the first clear signals of poison. These are the classic initial symptoms of low-level arsenic exposure for a Victorian living in such a room. This chronic feeling of being unwell, the constant headaches, the lack of appetite, the persistent lethargy, would have become their baseline state of health. They would have no idea that their fashionable decor was the source of their suffering, blaming their ailments on any number of other contemporary medical theories. Had you remained in the room for weeks or months, these initial vague symptoms would have blossomed into a far more terrifying and undeniable illness. Chronic arsenic poisoning attacks the body on multiple fronts. Your skin would break out in painful lesions and ulcers. Your eyes would become red and inflamed. Your hair would begin to fall out in clumps, and you'd experience violent stomach cramps and muscle spasms, a particularly telling sign that doctors of the time sometimes noted was a faint, yet distinct, garlic-like odor on the victim's breath, and sweat the smell of the poison slowly seeping from their very pores as it systematically destroyed their body from the inside out. This wasn't a niche problem, confined to a few unlucky households. Arsenic-laced decor was a widespread public health crisis, hiding in plain sight. By the 1860, it's estimated that Britain had over 100 million square yards of this toxic wallpaper, adorning its walls. From stately homes to middle-class parlors, the sheer ubiquity of the product meant that a significant portion of the population was living in environments that were actively, if slowly, poisoning them. It was a danger that crossed class lines, found in every corner of the country, a testament to the deadly consequences of an unregulated industry, prioritizing aesthetics and profit over human life. To truly comprehend the lethality, consider the dosage. It is estimated that a single, average-sized roll of this brilliant green wallpaper could contain up to 60 grains of arsenic. The lethal dose for an adult human is just 2 or 3 grains. This means that every single roll of wallpaper sold held enough poison to kill 20 people. The walls of a single, stylishly decorated room were, in effect, lined with a chemical arsenal, a vast and silent reservoir of death that was sold over the counter at any home goods store. The scale of the potential danger, measured against the tiny amount needed to kill, is nothing short of staggering and reveals a shocking disregard for safety. The wallpaper was perhaps the most dramatic source of this poison, but it was far from the only one. The same brilliant arsenic pigments were used with abandon across a huge range of consumer goods. They colored the fabrics of ladies' gowns, the ribbons on their bonnets, and the wax flowers they used to decorate their homes. Most chillingly, these same toxic greens were used to paint children's toys, which infants would inevitably place in their mouths. The poison was everywhere, a constant, hidden presence in the objects of daily life, integrated so completely into the material culture of the era that avoiding exposure would have been nearly impossible for anyone trying to keep up with the fashion. Having finally decided to leave the poisonous bedroom, your next ordeal begins. The complex and physically demanding ritual of getting dressed. For a woman of this era, this was not a simple matter of pulling on clothes. It was a process of construction, of building a rigid and fashionable silhouette upon the body, and the very foundation of that construction was the era's most iconic and formidable undergarment, the corset. It sits on a nearby chair, a daunting structure of whalebone, steel, and tightly woven fabric, complete with a seemingly endless series of laces that require significant strength or the help of a maid to tighten correctly. The primary function of the corset was not comfort or support, but the aggressive pursuit of a highly specific and unnatural aesthetic. The goal was to create the fashionable hourglass figure, a shape defined by a dramatically, almost impossibly, cinched waist. This silhouette was the absolute pinnacle of feminine beauty for the period, a visual shorthand that communicated elegance, refinement, and delicacy. The corset was the essential tool used to mold the flesh and bone of a real woman's body into this idealized form, squeezing and reshaping the torso to achieve a look that was dictated entirely by the whims of fashion, with little to no regard for the anatomy it was encasing. The daily discomfort of being cinched into a corset was merely the surface-level consequence. The truly sinister impact of this practice, known as tight lacing, was the severe and often permanent damage it inflicted upon the body over years of use. This was not a benign fashion statement. It was a significant, chronic health hazard that actively warped the wearer's anatomy. The constant, immense pressure required to achieve the desired silhouette was a form of slow, sustained violence against the body, a daily act that traded long-term health for the fleeting approval of conforming to a dangerous and punishing standard of beauty. The skeletal damage was not a matter of speculation. It is a documented medical fact. Museums and medical schools, such as the Royal College of Surgeons in London, still hold anatomical specimens from the 19th century that provide chilling, irrefutable evidence. The rib cages of women who were subjected to years of tight lacing are visibly and permanently deformed. The lower ribs are bent inward at extreme angles, compressed into a conical shape that bears little resemblance to a natural human form. This hard, physical proof serves as a silent, powerful testament to the corset's ability to literally break and reshape the human skeleton in the name of fashion. While the corset was crushing the ribs from the outside, it was simultaneously wreaking havoc on the delicate systems within. The intense compression forced internal organs to shift from their natural positions, leading to a cascade of physiological problems. The stomach and intestines were squeezed, causing chronic indigestion, constipation, and nutrient malabsorption. The liver could be permanently misshapen. A woman's uterus was also at risk, with uterine prolapse being a known, agonizing consequence. Furthermore, the inability to take a deep breath severely limited lung capacity, leading to fainting spells and making the body far more vulnerable to respiratory diseases like tuberculosis. Physicians of the era were not entirely blind to the corset's effects. They frequently encountered a condition in young women they termed chloroses, or the green sickness, so named for the pale, greenish tint of the sufferer's skin. We now understand this to be a severe form of iron deficiency anemia, but Victorian doctors often linked it directly to the fashionable practice of tight lacing. They correctly observed that the restrictive garment led to shallow breathing, poor circulation, and a general state of fragility, connecting this debilitating medical condition directly to the relentless pressures of conforming to the era's extreme and damaging beauty standards. Surviving the corset is only the first step. Now, you must endure the sheer weight and volume of the clothing that goes on over it. The layers are numerous and oppressive. A chemise, drawers, multiple petticoats, some made of flannel for warmth, others starched for volume, and finally, the dress itself. This outer garment would likely be made of a heavy fabric like wool or taffeta, and consist of a tightly fitted, high-necked bodice and a voluminous skirt. The combined weight of this entire ensemble could be significant, severely restricting movement, and turning simple actions like walking upstairs into a genuine physical exertion. Freedom of movement was a luxury women did not have. At the height of fashion's excess, the silhouette was expanded to truly absurd proportions by a device known as the crinoline. This was essentially a cage, a rigid, bell-shaped structure made from flexible steel hoops or whalebone, designed to be worn under the skirt. It could expand a woman's dress to a diameter of several feet, creating a dramatic, imposing figure that took up an enormous amount of physical space. While it was lighter than the multiple layers of heavy petticoats it replaced, the crinoline introduced its own unique and far more deadly set of problems. It was a fashion statement that was cumbersome, impractical, and, as many women would discover, catastrophically dangerous. The danger of the crinoline lay in its unfortunate combination of size, shape, and material. The vast, open structure of the cage, combined with the lightweight and highly flammable fabrics like cotton, muslin, and silk that were draped over it, created a perfect fire hazard. If a woman stood too close to one of the era's ubiquitous open hearths, or gas lamps, a single stray spark could instantly ignite her dress. The cage structure would then act like a chimney, drawing air upward and fanning the flames with terrifying speed, engulfing the wearer in a pillar of fire, from which escape was nearly impossible due to the garment's sheer bulk and restrictive nature. This was not a rare or freak accident. It was a shockingly common tragedy. It is estimated that during the peak of the crinoline's popularity in the mid-19th century, thousands of women across Europe and America burned to death in this manner. The press was filled with horrifying accounts of these crinoline fires. One of the most famous victims was Fanny Longfellow, the beloved wife of the American poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, who died in 1861 after her dress caught fire in her own home. This terrifying statistic and well-known example serve as a stark reminder that, for Victorian women, the simple act of getting dressed could be a fatal decision. After surviving the ordeal of dressing, you turn to the morning ritual of washing your face. On a marble-topped washstand sits an ornate porcelain pitcher and basin, beautifully decorated with delicate, hand-painted flowers. It appears to offer a moment of gentle, civilized calm after the physical torment of the corset and the lingering fear of your flammable clothing. Yet, this seemingly innocent act is riddled with its own invisible threats. In the Victorian home, danger was not confined to the dramatic. It was woven into the very fabric of daily existence, lurking in the most mundane objects and ordinary routines. This simple basin of water, meant for cleaning, is no exception to that unforgiving and ever-present rule. The water that fills this beautiful pitcher was likely carried into your room by a servant, but its journey began long before that. In many affluent homes, water was stored in large cisterns, often located on the roof or in the attic. These tanks, designed to provide a ready supply of water to the household, were almost universally lined with a cheap, durable, and pliable metal, lead. As the water sat in the tank, sometimes for days on end, this potent neurotoxin would slowly leach into the supply. Every drop of water used for washing, brushing teeth, or even preparing food was therefore a potential vehicle for slow, cumulative lead poisoning, an invisible contaminant in the source of life itself. Now that your face is clean, it is time to apply the fashionable visage of the day. A healthy, sun-kissed glow was considered terribly common, a sign that one had to perform outdoor labor. The truly aristocratic and fashionable ideal was a complexion of pure, almost deathly, pallor. This look was a powerful social signifier, an immediate and visible declaration that you were a person of leisure and wealth, someone who spent their days shielded from the sun's rays in elegant drawing rooms. This intense cultural pressure drove women to pursue this ghostly aesthetic at any cost, using a variety of cosmetic preparations to paint their faces into a mask of pale, fragile, and high-status beauty. To achieve this coveted ghostly pallor, the most popular products were lotions and fine powders, advertised as lily or pearl creams. The magical ingredient that gave these cosmetics their prized opaque, white finish was often lead carbonate. Women would liberally dust or paint this lead-based mixture onto their faces, necks, and chests, creating a smooth, porcelain-like veneer over their natural skin. This daily ritual was, in effect, the act of applying a thin layer of potent poison directly to the skin, allowing the toxin to be slowly absorbed into the bloodstream day after day, all in the name of achieving a fleeting and deadly standard of beauty. The consequences of this daily lead application were gruesome. While the initial effect was the desired pale complexion, the long-term results were devastating. The lead would cause the skin to dry out, wrinkle, and develop unsightly gray or black patches, ironically forcing the user to apply even more of the poison to cover the damage it had caused. Internally, the slow accumulation of lead led to symptoms ranging from hair loss and dental problems to severe abdominal pain, nerve damage, and paralysis. Eventually, this pursuit of a pale face could, and often did, lead to a slow and agonizing death from organ failure. Beauty was, quite literally, a killer. While the face was a canvas of white, a subtle, rosy blush on the cheeks was considered a sign of delicate feeling and femininity. But this touch of color was not achieved with harmless modern pigments, the most common ingredient used to create these blushes and lip tints was vermilion, a brilliant red pigment derived from cinnabar. Cinnabar is mercury sulfide. This meant that women were dabbing another potent neurotoxin onto their skin, absorbing it through their pores and lips. The irony was profound. In their quest to simulate the appearance of vibrant health and delicate beauty, they were poisoning themselves with a substance known to cause tremors, memory loss, and severe neurological damage. The final touch to this toxic mask of beauty involved the eyes. The ideal was a wide-eyed, luminous, and almost feverish gaze, a look associated with the tragic and romanticized fragility of consumption tuberculosis. To achieve this dilated, dark-pupilled effect, women administered eye drops made from a tincture of belladonna, also known as deadly nightshade. The atropine in the plant extract would force the pupils to dilate, creating the desired dramatic and doe-eyed appearance. This was a common practice before attending a ball or a party, a seemingly harmless trick to enhance one's allure for an evening. The harmless trick of using belladonna eye drops came with severe and unavoidable consequences. The immediate effects included extreme light sensitivity, blurred vision, and an inability to focus on anything up close, making navigating a crowded ballroom a challenge. But the long-term damage was far worse. Repeated use of this poisonous extract would strain the muscles of the eye and could permanently damage the optic nerve. Over time, this fashionable practice could lead to a progressive and irreversible loss of vision, plunging the user into a literal, not just fashionable, darkness. The price for a few nights of captivating eyes was, for many, the loss of their sight. Descending from your room, you are now faced with the prospect of the Victorian breakfast table. After the gauntlet of poisons encountered in the bedroom and at the washstand, you might hope that the day's first meal would offer some respite. But this hope would be profoundly misplaced. In the 19th century, before any meaningful government regulation, the food supply chain was a lawless frontier. The kitchen and the dining room were just another front in the daily war against hidden dangers, presenting a whole new menu of contaminants and frauds that threatened the health of every man, woman, and child in the household. The driving force behind this crisis was simple, relentless greed. In a rapidly industrializing society, with a growing urban population, the competition among food producers and sellers was fierce. With no regulatory bodies to oversee their practices, there was a powerful financial incentive to cut costs and increase profit margins by any means necessary. This led to the widespread and systematic practice of adulteration, the act of bulking out, coloring, or preserving food with cheaper and often dangerous foreign substances. It was a shadowy industry built on deception, one that viewed the consumer not as a customer to be served, but as a mark to be exploited. Consider the simple loaf of bread sitting on the table. It looks white, fluffy, and wholesome, but it is likely hiding a key ingredient that has nothing to do with flour. To make the bread appear whiter and more appealing, and to allow for the use of cheaper, lower quality flour, bakers routinely mixed in a powdered mineral called alum. Alum was a cheap and effective bleaching agent that created a loaf that looked far more expensive and refined than it actually was. This deception was not just about appearance. The alum also allowed the bread to absorb more water, making the final product significantly heavier and therefore more profitable for the baker, who sold his goods by weight. The addition of alum to a family's daily bread was not a benign deception. While it improved the loaf's appearance, it had a detrimental effect on the person who ate it. Alum is an astringent that severely inhibits the body's ability to digest proteins. This meant that the bread itself, a primary source of sustenance, was made less nutritious by its secret ingredient. For the working poor, who relied on bread as a cheap staple, this was a disaster. The alum caused chronic constipation, severe gastrointestinal distress, and malnourishment, slowly sickening the population with the very food that was supposed to keep them alive. It turned the staff of life into a source of chronic illness. Alum was the baker's preferred adulterant, but the list of contaminants didn't stop there. An investigation of London bakeries in the mid-century found a horrifying array of other fillers being mixed into the dough. Less harmful, but still fraudulent, additions included mashed potatoes and chalk dust, used to add cheap bulk and whiteness. Far more alarmingly, some bakers were found to be using plaster of Paris, a substance used for construction and casting, as a filler. This meant that families were unknowingly consuming a key ingredient of wall plaster with their daily meal, a shocking testament to the depths of deception practiced in the unregulated food industry. The milk in the pitcher on the table presents an even more disgusting set of dangers. It was almost standard practice for milkmen to first dilute their product with water often drawn from contaminated sources, like the local river, to increase its volume. To restore the thinned milk's white appearance and creamy texture, a horrifying variety of substances were added. Chalk and plaster were common whiteners. Some accounts even describe milkmen adding mashed sheep's brains to the churn to create a richer, more convincing texture. The glass of milk you might be about to drink is likely a cocktail of contaminated water, chalk, and emulsified animal brains. In an era before refrigeration, milk soured and spoiled with incredible speed. To combat this and extend the shelf life of their product, sellers would add chemical preservatives. The most common of these was borax, a cleaning agent. A dose of borax could effectively mask the taste and smell of milk that was beginning to turn, deceiving the customer into believing it was fresh. But the chemical did absolutely nothing to kill the teeming colonies of dangerous bacteria that were multiplying within the liquid, including the microbes responsible for diseases like scarlet fever, diphtheria, and, most terrifyingly, bovine tuberculosis, which could be transmitted from sick cows to humans. This deadly combination of contamination and chemical deception made milk one of the single greatest threats to public health, especially for the very young. Contaminated milk was a primary vector for the transmission of fatal childhood diseases. It is now understood to have been a major contributor to the era's appalling infant mortality rate. Unwitting mothers, believing they were giving their babies the most wholesome food available, were instead feeding them a toxic brew of bacteria and chemicals. It was a daily tragedy, enacted in nurseries across the nation, a silent massacre perpetrated by the local milkman in his pursuit of a few extra pennies. The statistics born from this crisis are difficult to comprehend from a modern perspective. In major industrial cities like Manchester and Liverpool, during the 1870s, the infant mortality rate regularly soared above 200 deaths for every 1,000 live births. This means that in the poorest districts, more than 1 in every 5 babies would not survive to see their first birthday. While many factors contributed to this tragedy, from poor sanitation to endemic disease, there is no doubt that the contaminated and adulterated milk supply was a significant and direct cause, a daily source of poison, fed to the most vulnerable members of society. The brightly colored sweets and boiled candies offered in glass jars as a treat for children were particularly sinister. Their vibrant, alluring colors were not derived from harmless food dyes, but from the same toxic heavy metal salts used in industry and art. A brilliant yellow candy likely owed its hue to lead chromate, a potent neurotoxin. A vibrant green sweet was almost certainly colored with the same copper arsenite Scheele's green that was poisoning the inhabitants of the wallpapered bedroom. These candies were, in essence, small, sugary pellets of poison, deliberately packaged to be as attractive as possible to children. Even the civilized ritual of afternoon tea was not safe from this pervasive fraud. The contents of a tea caddy were frequently adulterated to increase their weight and bulk. Tea merchants were known to mix in everything from common dust and sand to iron filings, which could be detected by running a magnet through the tea leaves to restore the color of used or low-quality tea leaves. Some sellers would re-dry them and then paint them with a mixture containing Prussian blue and graphite. More disgustingly, some of the bulking material was rumored to be dried and pulverized sheep's dung, a horrifying addition to what was meant to be a refined and delicate beverage. For the man of the house, a pint of beer at the local pub or at home came with its own set of risks. Brewers, seeking to make their beer seem stronger and more intoxicating than it was, often added a substance called Cocculus indicus. This is the berry of a poisonous climbing plant, and it contains picrotoxin, a powerful central nervous system stimulant and convulsant. Adding this to the brew created a more intense feeling of intoxication and was highly addictive, ensuring customers would keep coming back for more. It was a dangerous, drug-laced product, another example of sellers prioritizing profit and repeat business over the health of their clientele. The tide began to turn, thanks to the tireless work of a few crusading individuals. The most important of these was Dr. Arthur Hill Hassall, a physician and pioneering microscopist. Beginning in 1851, he published a series of groundbreaking articles in the prestigious medical journal, The Lancet. For his analytical sanitary commission, Hassall painstakingly analyzed samples of food and drink purchased from vendors all over London, using his microscope to identify and document the horrifying array of adulterants he found. His work was methodical, scientific, and, for the British public, absolutely terrifying. Dr. Hassall's shocking, detailed, and scientifically unimpeachable reports in The Lancet caused a massive public outcry. For the first time, the general population was made aware of the scale and severity of the food adulteration crisis. The articles were widely reported on in newspapers, leading to a wave of consumer panic and anger. This immense public pressure forced a reluctant parliament to finally take action. In 1860, the first ever Adulteration of Food and Drink Act was passed. While it was a landmark piece of legislation, it was weak, poorly enforced, and largely ineffective at curbing the problem. The initial 1860 Act proved to be more of a warning shot than a solution. It took another 15 years of campaigning, public pressure, and political debate before a truly effective law was put in place. The Sale of Food and Drugs Act of 1875 was a far more comprehensive and powerful piece of legislation. Crucially, it made the adulteration of food with harmful ingredients a punishable offense, defined the responsibilities of sellers, and, most importantly, gave local authorities the power to appoint official public analysts. These analysts were empowered to test food and bring prosecutions, finally creating a system of accountability that would slowly clean up the nation's food supply. Leaving the breakfast table, you become aware of another modern convenience that permeates the Victorian home: gas lighting. Throughout the day, a soft, warm, and slightly hissing glow emanates from ornate brass fixtures on the walls and ceilings. This technology was a miracle, allowing life to continue with unprecedented brightness after sunset, replacing the dim, flickering light of candles and oil lamps. It was a symbol of progress, modernity, and prosperity, fundamentally changing the rhythm of daily life. But like so many of the era's innovations, this brilliant new light source brought with it a host of new, terrifying, and often fatal dangers. The danger of gaslighting stemmed directly from the era's primitive and unregulated infrastructure. The pipes that carried the flammable coal gas throughout the house were often made of cheap materials and were poorly installed by untrained workers. Joints were sealed with unreliable compounds that would dry out and crack over time. This meant that small, often imperceptible, gas leaks were not a rare occurrence. They were a chronic and accepted problem in almost any home that was piped for gas. The entire house was, in effect, threaded with a network of faulty pipes that were constantly leaking a flammable, explosive, and poisonous substance into the air. The most immediate and spectacular danger posed by these constant gas leaks was, of course, a violent explosion. All it took was a single, unfortunate spark, a servant striking a match to light a candle, a stray ember leaping from the fireplace, or even the static electricity from a swishing silk skirt. If the concentration of flammable coal gas in the air reached a critical level, the result was a devastating detonation that could blow out windows, demolish walls, and instantly incinerate the inhabitants of a room. Newspaper archives from the period are filled with lurid, tragic accounts of entire families being killed in an instant by these household explosions, a constant, terrifying reminder of the volatile power piped directly into their homes. Yet, an explosion was not the only way the gas could kill. In many ways, the more insidious threat was the one you couldn't see, hear, or smell. The coal gas used for illumination was a toxic cocktail of different chemicals, and its most dangerous component was carbon monoxide. This gas is a silent asphyxiant. When inhaled, it binds to the hemoglobin in red blood cells far more effectively than oxygen, starving the body's vital organs of the oxygen they need to function. A person in a poorly ventilated room with a slow, steady gas leak could simply drift off to sleep and never wake up, succumbing to this invisible poison in the night without any struggle or warning. As you step outside the front door, you are confronted with a danger that dwarfs any single threat within the house. The very air of the city is an assault on the senses. This reality reached its infamous apex during the summer of 1858, an event that Londoners would forever remember as the Great Stink. The smell rising from the city was not merely unpleasant. It was a physical, oppressive force, an all-encompassing miasma of filth and decay that was impossible to escape. It was the collective stench of a metropolis drowning in its own waste, a city whose primary river had been transformed into a festering, open sewer. It was the smell of a profound and catastrophic systems failure The direct cause of this citywide olfactory disaster was tragically simple. For centuries, the River Thames had been the lifeblood of London, but as the city's population exploded during the Industrial Revolution, the river was tasked with a new, impossible role: to serve as the primary dumping ground for the city's untreated human sewage, industrial effluent, and slaughterhouse waste. In the unusually hot, dry summer of 1858, the river's water level dropped dramatically, exposing the thick, black layers of accumulated filth on its banks to the baking sun. The heat fermented this raw sewage, releasing an unprecedented tidal wave of nauseating and poisonous fumes. The stench that summer was so powerful, so physically sickening, that it brought the world's most powerful city to its knees. The business of government itself was threatened at the recently rebuilt Houses of Parliament, located right on the banks of the foul river. The expensive curtains were soaked in chloride of lime in a desperate, futile attempt to mask the smell. The situation became so unbearable that politicians seriously debated abandoning Westminster altogether. This final, intolerable insult was the catalyst that finally shocked the government out of decades of inaction, forcing them to confront the monumental sanitation crisis they could no longer ignore. For most of the 19th century, the dominant scientific theory of disease transmission was the miasma theory. It held that illnesses like cholera, chlamydia, and the Black Death were caused by inhaling bad air, a poisonous vapor, or mist filled with particles from decaying organic matter. The Great Stink, with its overpowering, foul odor that seemed to coincide with waves of sickness, was seen by many as the ultimate confirmation of this theory. It was logical to assume that an air so foul must be deadly, a belief that, while incorrect, understandably gripped the public and medical establishment alike, focusing their efforts on fighting the smell rather than its true source. But 4 years prior to the Great Stink, a quiet, methodical physician named Dr. John Snow had already proven the miasma theory wrong. In a moment of stunning scientific insight, during a horrific and highly localized cholera outbreak that devastated the Soho district of London in 1854, Snow rejected the prevailing wisdom. He didn't believe the disease was in the air. Armed with skepticism and a map, he went door to door, talking to residents and tracking the pattern of the illness, convinced that the answer to its transmission lay not in what people were breathing, but in what they were drinking. Dr. Snow's investigative method was a brilliant example of early epidemiology. He marked every cholera case on a map of the Soho neighborhood. Very quickly, a clear and undeniable pattern emerged. The deaths were almost all clustered around a single, specific public water pump located on Broad Street. He found exceptions that proved his rule. Workers at a nearby brewery who drank beer instead of water remained healthy. Armed with this powerful data, he presented his findings to the local authorities and persuaded them to take the handle off the pump, making it impossible to draw water. The outbreak in that area almost immediately ceased. The removal of the pump handle was a moment of profound symbolic and scientific importance. Snow's investigation provided the first rigorous, data-driven proof that cholera was not an airborne miasma, but a waterborne pathogen spread through water contaminated with the fecal matter of other sufferers. Although his theory would take years to be fully accepted by the medical establishment, his work laid the foundational principles of modern epidemiology and public health. He had unmasked the true killer, revealing that the invisible threat was not in the air, but lurking, unseen, in a simple glass of water. The political momentum created by the Great Stink, combined with the growing, undeniable evidence from pioneers like John Snow finally spurred the city into monumental action. The colossal task of cleaning up London was given to a brilliant and determined civil engineer named Sir Joseph Bazalgette. As the chief engineer for the Metropolitan Board of Works, Bazalgette was empowered to design and execute a solution that would be radical, audacious, and permanent, a completely new, modern sewer system for the entire metropolis, designed to intercept the city's waste before it could ever reach the Thames. The scale of Bazalgette's vision and the engineering required to realize it were simply breathtaking. It was one of the most ambitious civil engineering projects the world had ever seen. His plan involved the construction of a vast, interconnected network of underground brick tunnels, over 1,100 miles of new street sewers would be built to collect the waste from individual homes and businesses. This local network would then feed into 82 miles of enormous, main intercepting sewers running parallel to the river, which would carry the city's combined effluent far to the east, away from the city's water intakes. After years of tireless construction, Bazalgette's grand sewer system was officially opened in 1875. Its impact was immediate, profound, and nothing short of miraculous. The Great Stink never returned. More importantly, the cholera epidemics that had periodically devastated the city for decades vanished almost overnight. By diverting the sewage away from the drinking water, Bazalgette's engineering marvel had saved countless thousands of lives and would go on to protect the health of millions more. It remains a testament to the power of visionary public works and is arguably the single greatest contribution to public health in the 19th century. Returning indoors, the tour of domestic dangers leads to what should be the safest and most innocent space in the entire house, the nursery. This was the protected realm of children, a space meant to be filled with laughter, play, and learning. Yet, the same ignorance, lack of regulation, and toxic materials that plagued the rest of the Victorian home had also thoroughly infiltrated the world of childhood. The very objects designed to bring joy and comfort to children were often, in reality, silent instruments of harm, posing a host of hidden threats to the most vulnerable members of the household. Consider the cheerfully painted wooden soldiers, building blocks, or rocking horses that filled a typical Victorian nursery. The bright, glossy paints used to make these toys so appealing to a child's eye were almost invariably lead-based. Children, in their natural exploratory phase, will inevitably put toys into their mouths. With every touch and taste, they were ingesting small but cumulative doses of this powerful neurotoxin. The toy soldier a child held so dearly could be slowly and silently poisoning him, inflicting damage that would last a lifetime, a tragic consequence of an industry that prized a bright finish over a child's well-being. The consequences of this early life lead exposure were catastrophic for a child's development. Lead poisoning attacks the nervous system and the brain, and in children, this can have devastating and irreversible effects. The symptoms range from learning disabilities and developmental delays to behavioral problems, hearing loss, and a lowered IQ. In cases of higher exposure, it could cause seizures, a coma, and even death. Many children who were simply labeled as slow or difficult may have, in fact, been the victims of lead poisoning from the very toys meant to entertain and educate them. Another popular material for creating toys, especially dolls, was an early form of plastic called celluloid. It was cheap, versatile, and could be molded into the cherubic faces and delicate limbs that were so popular. However, celluloid had a critical, fatal flaw. It was extraordinarily flammable. It had a very low ignition point, and contained nitrocellulose, a compound also used in gunpowder. This meant that a doll left too close to a nursery fireplace, or even a gas lamp, could not just catch fire, but spontaneously and explosively combust, turning a beloved plaything into a dangerous incendiary device in an instant. When the inevitable childhood fevers, coughs, and colics arrived, parents would turn to the medicine cabinet for a cure. But in an age before pharmaceutical regulation, clinical trials, or even a basic understanding of dosage, the remedies on offer were often far more deadly than the diseases they were intended to treat. The Victorian patent medicine industry was a world of charlatans and hucksters who sold cleverly marketed bottles of addictive narcotics, unprocessed stimulants, and outright poisons to a desperate and unsuspecting public, with children being their most vulnerable and profitable market. Among the hundreds of dubious remedies available, none was more famous, more widely used, or more deadly than the infamous Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup. It was aggressively marketed as a perfectly harmless and pleasant cure for any and all infant ailments, from teething pain and fussiness to colic and dysentery. Advertisements depicted serene mothers and blissfully sleeping babies, promising an instant end to the nightly ordeal of a crying child. For exhausted, desperate parents, the syrup seemed like a gift from heaven, a miraculous potion that could finally bring peace and quiet to their household. The miracle of Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup had a simple, brutal explanation. The formula's primary active ingredient was one of the most powerful and addictive narcotics known to man: morphine. The syrup was, in essence, a potent opiate solution mixed with alcohol and sugar to make it palatable for infants. Its soothing effect was nothing more than a powerful narcotic stupor. It didn't cure the child's pain or illness. It simply drugged the baby into a state of unconsciousness, providing the exhausted parents with a night of silence at a terrible and hidden cost. The sheer recklessness of the dosage is what made the product so lethal. Chemical analysis of surviving bottles has revealed that a single teaspoon of Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup contained approximately 65 milligrams of pure morphine. This is an enormous dose, more than enough to be fatal for an opiate-naive adult, let alone a tiny infant. A parent, following the bottle's instructions to administer the syrup freely, could easily give their child a lethal overdose by mistake, killing them in their sleep. The angel makers, as these syrups were sometimes called, were a silent scourge on the nurseries of the nation. It is impossible to know exactly how many children died as a direct result of these soothing syrups, but the number is undoubtedly in the many thousands. They died from acute overdoses, but they also died from the effects of chronic use. Babies would become addicted, suffering from painful withdrawal symptoms. When the syrup was withheld, their malnourishment was common, as they were often too sedated to feed properly. It was a slow-motion massacre, hiding in plain sight, earning the product its grim, whispered nickname. The baby killer, the American Medical Association would later call it one of the most dangerous patent medicines ever sold. Mrs. Winslow's was the most notorious, but the family medicine cabinet was a veritable arsenal of other unregulated poisons. Dangerous substances that are now tightly controlled were then sold freely over the counter for a wide range of dubious medical and cosmetic purposes. The line between medicine, cosmetic, and poison was dangerously blurred, and self-medication was the norm, with the public having little to no understanding of the powerful substances they were so casually consuming on a daily basis, trusting the bold promises printed on the label of a bottle. A staple of this domestic pharmacy was laudanum, a simple tincture of opium dissolved in alcohol. It was the era's go-to-cure-all, a universal panacea used to treat everything from coughs, colds, and diarrhea to anxiety, insomnia, and women's troubles. It was cheaper than gin and just as easy to procure. Entire generations lived in a state of low-grade, socially acceptable opiate addiction, using laudanum to take the edge off the hardships of daily life. Famous literary figures from Lord Byron to Elizabeth Barrett Browning were all regular users, highlighting its ubiquity across all social classes in a bizarre and dangerous overlap between medicine and cosmetics. Arsenic, the same poison lining the walls of the bedroom, was also sold in pill form. These arsenic complexion wafers were marketed directly to women with the promise that they would clear up pimples, freckles, and other blemishes, creating a pale, translucent complexion. The theory was that the poison would kill the parasites in the blood that caused skin problems. In reality, women were simply ingesting small, cumulative doses of a deadly carcinogen, slowly poisoning themselves from the inside out in their pursuit of perfect, unblemished skin. The beginning of the end for this era of toxic free-for-all came with the passage of the Pharmacy Act of 1868. This landmark piece of British legislation was the first serious attempt to regulate the sale of dangerous substances. It established a list of 15 recognized poisons, including arsenic, laudanum, and cyanide, and mandated that they could only be sold by a qualified, registered chemist or pharmacist. Furthermore, it required that these substances be sold in bottles specifically designed to be identifiable by touch and clearly labeled with the word poison. It was the first critical step in separating medicine from poison and protecting the public from itself. Throughout this tour of domestic horrors, there has been a silent, almost invisible presence. The household staff, the dangers you have faced as a member of the family, are abstract and chronic. But for the maids, cooks, and footmen who keep the household running, the risks are far more immediate, physical, and acute. Their existence is one of endless labor in the most hazardous parts of the house: the sweltering kitchens, the dusty basements, and the precarious back stairways. The class divide in a Victorian home was not just a matter of wealth and comfort. It was a profound disparity in daily exposure to injury, illness, and an early grave. Their safety was an afterthought, their health expendable. For the kitchen maid, the day began and ended with the management of fire and boiling water, making severe burns a constant daily threat. She wrestled with enormous, heavy cast-iron pots over roaring open flames and hauled buckets of scalding water from the stove to the scullery. The laundry maid faced similar perils, spending her days over steaming vats of lye and water. A moment's distraction, a slippery floor, or the simple clumsiness brought on by sheer exhaustion could result in a catastrophic injury. These were not considered accidents in the modern sense. They were seen as a routine, if unfortunate, occupational hazard for those in domestic service. While the family ascended the grand, carpeted main staircase, the servants were relegated to the back stairs. These were typically narrow, steep, dimly lit, and winding, designed to take up as little valuable space as possible, constantly rushing up and down these treacherous stairways while carrying heavy trays, buckets of coal, or stacks of linen. A servant was always just one misplaced step away from a serious fall. A broken bone for a servant was not just a medical issue. Without any form of sick pay or job security, an injury that prevented them from working was a catastrophe that could easily lead to instant dismissal and a swift descent into utter destitution. The Victorian obsession with cleanliness paradoxically exposed the servants who performed the cleaning to a battery of harsh chemicals. Without the benefit of modern, safety-tested cleaning products, maids relied on caustic and toxic substances to scrub floors, polish brass, and unblock drains. They worked with their bare hands, using powerful agents like lye sodium hydroxide, carbolic acid, and rough abrasives. This constant exposure resulted in painful chemical burns, chronic skin conditions, and the absorption of toxins through the skin, adding yet another layer of invisible, long-term health risks to their already dangerous lives. The air the servants breathed was fundamentally different from that in the family's living quarters. They spent their days in poorly ventilated kitchens, thick with cooking fumes and coal smoke, and their nights in small, often shared attic or basement rooms where dust and damp were constant companions. The continuous inhalation of this particulate-laden air put them at an extremely high risk for a host of debilitating respiratory illnesses, from chronic bronchitis and pneumonia to the deadliest disease of the age, tuberculosis. For a servant, the very air inside the house they so diligently cleaned was often just as polluted as the industrial smog outside. This relentless, daily accumulation of physical and environmental risks had a clear and tragic outcome. The life expectancy of a domestic servant was dramatically lower than that of the people they served, while a wealthy individual who survived the perils of childhood could reasonably expect to live into their 60s or 70s. The men and women in service were worn down by endless toil, poor nutrition, and constant exposure to danger. Their bodies simply broke down faster. This stark difference in lifespan within the same four walls is one of the clearest illustrations of the brutal inequality that defined the Victorian social structure. The cold, hard statistics paint a grim picture of this class-based mortality gap. In the most affluent London boroughs, like Kensington, the average life expectancy for the gentry and professionals was comfortably over 50 years. But just a few miles away, in the impoverished East End districts, like Whitechapel, where a huge portion of the city's laboring class and servants lived, the average life expectancy for that same class plummeted to a shocking 22 years. To be born into poverty or service in the Victorian era was, statistically speaking, to be condemned to a life that was not only harder, but also brutally shorter. If the dangers within the domestic sphere were this severe, the situation in the factories that powered the Victorian economy was exponentially worse. To understand the era's general attitude towards safety, one must look briefly outside the home to the industrial landscape, where human life was considered the cheapest and most expendable commodity of all. In places like the match factories, which predominantly employed young, impoverished women and girls, the working conditions were so hazardous that they produced a unique and truly monstrous occupational disease, a fate considered by many to be worse than death. The young women who made the popular Lucifer matches worked for hours on end in poorly ventilated rooms, handling a toxic substance called white phosphorus. This chemical was the key ingredient that allowed the matches to ignite easily, but it was also a cumulative poison. The workers would absorb the phosphorus through their skin and, most significantly, inhale its fumes. Over time, this exposure led to the development of a horrific condition, known officially as phosphorus necrosis of the jaw, but known colloquially by a simpler, more terrifying name, phossy jaw. Phossy jaw began with a dull toothache and swollen gums. Then, the bone of the jaw itself would begin to die and rot away from the inside. Sufferers experienced excruciating pain as their facial bones crumbled producing a foul-smelling discharge and leading to grotesque disfigurement. The dead bone would sometimes glow with a faint, greenish-white light in the dark. The only cure was the surgical removal of the entire jawbone. But even this radical step often failed to halt the progress of the necrosis, which frequently led to fatal brain damage and organ failure. It was an agonizing and uniquely hellish way to die, for the sake of a cheap box of matches. As dusk begins to settle over the city, the soft, hypnotic glow of the gas lamps once again fills the house. Their gentle hissing provides a warm and inviting light, pushing back the encroaching darkness of the night. This modern miracle, which has seemed so threatening during the day, now offers a sense of comfort and civilization, a fragile barrier against the gloom. But the knowledge of the day's journey changes your perception. The light no longer feels merely warm. It feels watchful. The hissing no longer sounds gentle. It sounds like a warning, a constant reminder of the volatile and poisonous power flowing silently through the walls around you. The day has been a harrowing, non-stop journey through a landscape of hidden threats. It began with the invisible poison seeping from the walls and the microscopic dangers lurking in the mattress. It continued with the physical constriction of the clothing, the toxic allure of the cosmetics, and the fraudulent poisons served at the breakfast table. Every single step, from getting dressed to drinking a glass of water, has been a gamble, a negotiation with a world that is fundamentally hostile to human health and safety. You have, in the space of a few hours, survived a gauntlet of dangers that would seem utterly surreal in any other context. This relentless exposure forces a profound realization. Every aspect of modern life is supported by an invisible architecture of safety that was completely absent in the 19th century. We drink water without fearing cholera, eat food without fearing poison, and flip a light switch without fearing an explosion. These are luxuries we take so for granted that they are not even perceived as luxuries. The Victorian experience reveals that safety is not the default state of human existence. It is a recent, hard-won, and incredibly precious invention built upon the tragic lessons learned from centuries of daily, unrelenting risk. Let's review the toxic checklist of your day. You have inhaled arsenic gas from the wallpaper and carbon monoxide from the gas lamps. You have washed with lead-contaminated water and applied more lead and mercury directly to your skin. You have consumed food adulterated with alum and bacteria, and you were offered medicines containing staggering doses of opiates. This is not an unusual day. This is a normal Tuesday. You have been exposed to a greater variety and quantity of poisons in a single day than a modern person might encounter in their entire lifetime. For the people of the time, this constant dance with death was not a source of panic or dread. It was simply life. The high infant mortality rate, the chronic illnesses, the sudden, inexplicable deaths, these were woven into the fabric of society and accepted with a kind of weary resignation. Without the scientific knowledge to understand the true sources of the dangers surrounding them, they attributed their suffering to providence, bad air, or a weakness of constitution. They had no other choice but to normalize a level of risk that we would find absolutely intolerable. The central premise of this journey, that a modern person would not last 24 hours, is now starkly clear. Survival is not a matter of wit or strength, but of sheer, dumb luck. You might avoid the crinoline fire, only to succumb to the contaminated milk. You might escape the acute danger of a gas explosion, only to be slowly sickened by the arsenic in the air. To survive a single day is possible, but to live a long, healthy life in this environment would require a constitution of iron and the luck of a lottery winner. The house is not a home. It is a beautifully decorated death trap. Yet, this story is not just a grim catalog of horrors. Woven into the narrative of danger is a parallel, more hopeful story of progress. The very fact that we know about these risks is a testament to the heroes who fought back. This era of death and disease was also an era of unprecedented scientific discovery, engineering prowess, and social reform. The story of the Victorian home's dangers is inextricably linked to the story of the brave individuals who dedicated their lives to making the world a safer place, often in the face of ridicule and fierce opposition. This battle was waged in laboratories and on city streets by figures like Dr. John Snow and Dr. Arthur Hill Hassall. They were medical detectives who trusted data over dogma, using methodical, scientific investigation to unmask the invisible killers hiding in the water and the food. They were pioneers who demonstrated that evidence-based inquiry could solve real-world problems and save countless lives. Their work reminds us that the first step to solving a problem is understanding it, and that science can be the most powerful tool for social change. The fight was also waged in the mud and tunnels beneath the city by visionaries like Sir Joseph Bazalgette. He was an engineer who understood that public health was not just a medical issue, but an infrastructure issue. He and his contemporaries reshaped the urban landscape, building the systems, the sewers, the clean water mains, the public parks that would form the very foundation of the modern, healthier city. They proved that bold, large-scale engineering projects could be the most effective form of preventative medicine, protecting millions from diseases they would now never have to encounter. Finally, the battle was fought in the halls of Parliament and in the pages of newspapers by social reformers and journalists. Public outcry, fueled by shocking reports and campaigning journalism, created the political will needed to enact change. Landmark legislation like the Pharmacy Act and the Sale of Food and Drugs Act, for the first time, established the principle that the government had a responsibility to protect its citizens from dangerous products and fraudulent practices. They were the first steps in holding industry accountable and creating a regulatory framework to ensure public safety. Ultimately, the journey through the Victorian house reveals a fundamental shift in human consciousness. It marks the transition from a world where risk was an individual's burden to a world where public health is understood as a collective responsibility. The safety we enjoy today is the direct legacy of this transformation. It is the result of a society deciding that a high infant mortality rate is not an acceptable tragedy, that food should be safe to eat, and that people should not be poisoned by their own wallpaper. It is a profound moral achievement that is easy to overlook. The overwhelming urge you now feel to escape this house, to flee back to your own time, is more than just a desire for comfort. It is a deep, instinctual rejection of a world without safety nets. It is the feeling of a modern person confronting the raw, untamed reality that our ancestors inhabited. Your desperation to leave is a measure of the distance we have traveled, a visceral appreciation for the silent, invisible systems of regulation, science, and infrastructure that protect us every single day, without our ever having to think about them. This journey reveals that the boring subjects of history are often the most important. We tend to be fascinated by kings, queens, and great battles, but the truly dramatic stories are often found in the history of sanitation policy, food regulation, and chemical analysis. These are the stories that have had the most profound impact on our daily lives. They are tales of life and death, of scientific discovery against all odds, and of the long, hard-fought struggle to create a world where a child can simply expect to grow up. As you finally step through the door and back into the 21st century, the first breath of clean, unscented air feels like a miracle. The quiet hum of electricity feels like a profound comfort. The simple act of turning on a tap and drinking a glass of water without a second thought feels like an incredible privilege. The final emotion is not one of disgust for the past, but one of overwhelming gratitude for the present. The experience leaves you with a deep and lasting appreciation for the unsung heroes and the unseen systems that make modern life not just comfortable, but survivable. The 24 hours are over. You have survived, but the experience leaves an indelible mark. It serves as a powerful, chilling corrective to any romantic, idealized notions of the good old days. The past, you now understand, is not a quaint and charming costume drama. It is a foreign country where the rules of survival are brutal, and the chances of an early death are astonishingly high. The greatest marvel of the modern world, you realize, is not the smartphone in your pocket or the jet in the sky, but the simple, precious, and hard-won fact that you are safe in your own home.